Great. Thanks for the introductions all, and to Shane, Raid, and Richard. It's great to see the interest today in these MMC training courses. I suppose at the offset, we should say that MMC does have the potential to meaningfully impact on the supply of housing in the state, which is a key issue. And in general, just a further thanks to NBC MSO for organising these training events. I think they're very useful for engaging with the wider industry. So I'll begin by, I suppose, presenting the building regulations and the technical guidance documents and explaining the relationship between them. So the Irish building regulations comes in 12 parts, from A through M, as seen on your screen. So when carrying out works, it's incumbent on designers, builders, owners that the works are carried out in accordance with these regulations. Alongside each regulation, there's a technical guidance document. This is a guide of indicating of how people can comply with the overall requirement of the regulation. So where works are carried out in accordance with the details in a technical guidance document, a TGD, it indicates prima facie or default compliance with the parent regulation. We shall say, though, that I suppose details or taking approaches that aren't as specifically outlined in the TGD isn't precluded, but it'll be incumbent on the designers to prove that whatever deviation that they're doing is compliant with the parent regulation. So here we have the text of the parent regulation. So this is part D1 and D3 of part D of the building regulations. Just for openness, I've excluded part D2, which relates to positioning of letterboxes. We're not going to go into that today. Anyone who's interested, by all means. So these are the overarching requirements for part D, and they have to be met for all works where the building regulations apply. So now, when we jump into the actual TGD, I suppose the overall regulation is titled Materials and Workmanship, and so it's broken into two kind of separate parts. We can speak firstly about the materials and how do we determine what is a proper material within the meaning of the regulations, and then I suppose a material on its own is only worth its salt if it's installed correctly and installed in the correct manner. So within this part, there's a definition of proper materials, and I say proper materials as defined by the regulation. So it's a material which is fit for use, for the use which they're intended, and the conditions that they are to be used. So what does that mean? So you have to consider the conditions that any product is going into. You may have a concrete block, a piece of steel, a piece of timber that is fine in some cases and not suitable in other cases. You may have a concrete block that is strong enough to hold up a two-story house. It may not have the strength to hold up a 4, 6, 8-story apartment, just due to the load that's on it. The material itself could be fine, but you need to consider the material in conjunction with the situation that it's being installed in. So when you're considering the conditions of that the materials are going to be used, so we have a number of national provisions spread throughout some documents, such as TGDs, national annexes to Irish standards, and standard recommendations. So I'll talk a little bit more about them as we go throughout the presentation. I'll try to lace the presentation with examples just to give it a bit of grounding in reality. And so when we go into the document, we have three definitions within the requirements of the regulation. So the CE mark, the harmonised products, and products which comply with an Irish standard or an agreement cert. So they're recognised within the parent regulation. In addition to that, the CGD shows other ways that a material can be deemed to be compliant. Independent certification schemes, carried out tests and calculations, or demonstrate its performance, its previous performance in use. So the first definition within the parent regulation is products which bear CE mark in accordance with the construction products regulation. So products which are on the market that are within the scope of the construction product regulations have to be provided with a declaration of performance, a DOP, and a CE mark documentation. So this provides critical information for designers to help determine if a product is suitable for their design case. So if I'm purchasing windows or doors, I'll be provided with a DOP and a CE mark that'll provide me critical information. What's the lambda value of it? So the manufacturer will also have to declare the intended use of their product along with the provision of the essential characteristics. So if they're providing you with a steel beam, but it's not to be used outside or it's not to be exposed to elements, external elements, they're to state that to the market and to the designer and to the purchaser. So a good example of this would be, I suppose, a load-bearing element, a timber, steel beam, both of which are harmonized under CPR. The CE mark, the DOP, will provide the critical information. It'll provide you the dimensions of the beam. It'll provide you the strength grade and the manufacturer's intended use. So going back to the comment earlier about, the product in and of itself needs to be considered in how it's going to be used. So if you were to install that beam in a typical domestic, say, kitchen extension, you might have an opening 2-3 meters wide. It may be suitable for that because it's only holding up a floor above it. But if you were to put that same sized steel, same size piece of wood in an industrial setting, in a large warehouse with a bigger opening or with greater loads on it, the material itself is still the same material, but it could switch from being a proper material in a domestic case to being not suitable in the latter case. So that's a key idea to get across here early on, is that material needs to be considered holistically in terms of where it's being installed. Second definition then is materials that comply with appropriate harmonized standards, or ETAs. So this is for materials which aren't within the scope of the CPR. There's a voluntary mechanism for manufacturers to opt into the CPR provisions. So in doing this, the manufacturer can work with a technical assessment body, of which we have 3 in the state, and there's just hundreds across the single market, to get an ETA. So this essentially is a technical document that provides the manufacturer with a declaration of what their product does. I suppose one of the most common examples of products that are used in this route, in my experience, are anchor bolts. So again, it's down to the designer to determine what size, what anchorage, etc., is suitable for their end use. But the technical documentation provided by the manufacturer will help them in that determination. And the final definition within the regulation is definition C. So materials that comply with an Irish standard, an Irish Agomont cert, or to an equivalent from another member of the EEA. So there's a presentation after the tea and coffee break by Martin Searson from NSCI, who will delve into the details of the Irish Agomont cert system. But I suppose when using this clause to demonstrate the compliance of material as a proper material, and I say proper inverted commas, you should consider the specific details contained within the standards or Agomont certs. The details within that cert need to be complied with. They often contain additional details relating to the level of workmanship or checks, or the construction details that are to be used in order for it to comply with the certificate. So the devil is in the detail. The certificate is not in and of itself a carte blanche for compliance. It needs the certificate, or the standard does need to be read and does need to be complied with. Again, national provisions where they exist need to be respected. These are detailed in various TGDs, national annexes to Irish standards, and standard recommendation SR documents. So I suppose an example would be minimum thermal transmittance values within windows and doors. So we have these specified in certain cases in TGDL, or minimum blockwork compressive strengths. So we have these specified in technical guidance documents A or standard recommendation 325. A proviso, and you'll note that the final bullet point is a little bit in red. So we are entitled, the industry is entitled to use standards from other EEA countries, other EU countries, that will demonstrate an equivalent level of safety and stability. But I suppose these need to be considered within the Irish context. Our climate, our construction styles, our materials, and our regulatory requirements can vary significantly from our European colleagues. So anyone who wishes to, I suppose, take advantage of the flexibility in this clause would be recommended that they consult with the National Standards Authority of Ireland in relation to advice to determine equivalence of another country's document with, I suppose, the requirements in the Irish setting. So that was the three definitions provided for in the parent regulation. So then there's further flexibilities provided by the technical guidance document. So materials that, I suppose, that can't be or haven't been able to be deemed compliant in the first three mechanisms could also come in through this stream. So you could have materials that are independently certified by approval bodies. So an example being the National Standards Authority of Ireland. So there are some provisos as seen on the screen. I'm not going to bore you by reading them out, but one of the examples would be the NSAI have an approval scheme for poured concrete, so concrete subject to ISEN 206. So when purchasing in situ concrete that has been certified by this scheme, you can be aware that it's gone through a certification process through NSAI that involves them assessing the registration. They've issued the manufacturer a certificate of conformity, that they've maintained a registration, that they've been audited at different frequencies, and that NSAI are satisfied that that the product is suitable for being placed on the market. So other providers do exist, but that's one of the more widely known schemes out there. And the final two definitions within this are, I suppose, tests and calculations and performance in use. So these alternative routes establish the fitness of material. They do provide significant flexibility. It should be noted that this regulation, as with all the building regulation, it's performance-based and materially neutral. I suppose questions that we received are increasing to receive relate to, I suppose, the growing scene on the circular economy. So circular economy principles, we believe, will continue to be embedded and continue to grow in the construction industry. So we do get constant queries about, I suppose, reusing existing materials. So we would highlight that both of these provisions, either by taking existing materials and testing or calculating what their performance is likely to be, or by determining its performance in use, does provide industry and manufacturers and designers significant flexibilities in this regard. So what we can say is work is ongoing at the European level to revise construction product regulations and also to revise the body of harmonised product standards. I suppose one of the aims of this work is to include environmental essential characteristics, such as in the new construction product regulations, it'll be a compulsory requirement for a manufacturer to declare the embodied carbon that has gone into making their product. And it's also envisaged that these new product standards, when they come online, would provide product-specific rules for reuse, so deinstalling and reusing construction products, so that we don't have such a reliance on landfilling products that do have potential to be used again. Now, if we flick on to the next part of the regulation, Part D, is workmanship. So again, a good product installed poorly is not a good outcome. So within this, we have the definition of competency. Excuse me. So to ensure a proper standard of workmanship, it's essential that persons are competent, possess sufficient training, experience, and knowledge appropriate to the nature of the work that they're required to perform, and have particular regard to the size and complexity of such works. So what does that mean? I suppose at a high level, works are to be carried out in a workmanlike manner. So how do you comply with that? So the route suggested by the prima facie compliance, in the first instance, you use proper material. Even the best surgeon with bad tools or bad materials, you can't conjure up miracles. So we do cite BS 8000. This is a workmanship on building sites standard, which gathers together guidance from a suite of British standards and gives guidance on basic workmanship for conventional types of work. Compliance with Agrimont certs, as mentioned earlier, and as Martin will tease out later on. So how to assemble works on site often is detailed in Agrimont certs. So if you're relying on an Agrimont cert, the details of construction within the cert do have to be complied with. Quality assurance schemes, again, mentioned the ISEN 206 performance in use. We've seen, if you something that would be common is taking an existing roof slate off a property that's being demolished. If the roof slate can be determined that it's fulfilled its function for X amount of years, there's an argument that it shouldn't go to landfill, that it should find another home as a roof slate. So that's, I suppose, the ins and outs of what the regulation says. But a lot of the people here are going to be designers, specifiers, building owners, or building control personnel. So if in future you sit down and you flick through this presentation, you go, well, that's all well and good. What does it mean to me? So what do I need to check? So does the product in and of itself present sufficient evidence to show compliance with the building regulations? Does it have a declaration of performance? If it doesn't, does it have some certification like Agrimont certification? Check the terms and conditions. Is it comply with an Irish standard? If it does it need any third-party approvals, etc.? Other things that could come up in this would be, does it have an ETA, European Test Assessment? If it does, this will provide some of the technical tick-offs to comply with parts of the building regulations, but it's written in a standard general European test setting. It needs to be verified that it ticks the requirements of the Irish building regulations. So somebody competent will have to sit down and make that determination. Is the material fit for use, and is in the intended use? Is it fit for use, and is it for which it's intended to be used for? Bit of a mouthful. Does it comply with the requirements of the Irish national annexes or standard recommendations? Example being, I suppose, hardcore beneath houses has to comply with SR 21. If you have material that isn't tested and isn't compliant with SR 21, it has no place being placed beneath a house. And finally, just in order to help with demonstration of compliance, of competency, there are a number of additional measures that are mentioned across some of the TGDs. So you have an installer's register, an air tightness register, and within TGDE, you have sound testing register. So in each of those documents, there's more detail given over how competency can be proven and how it can be detailed. Some of the common queries that we get into the department, I suppose in the last few years since Brexit has been the status of BBA certs. So, and this is very relevant in terms of the MMC, which I suppose, because of the size of the British market, a lot of the industry players may have went through Agrimont certification in the UK and are now saying, well, does this mean that it's okay to build within the Irish context? We should say Irish building regulations and UK building regulations, while at a first glance can seem very similar, we do have distinct differences. So a document that declares that a material or a system complies with the UK building regulations should not and could not be automatically deemed to comply with all parts of the Irish building regulations. Our rules are different. So I suppose when you read the opening page of any BBA cert or any third country cert that I've ever read, terms and conditions will say what the document does. And I've not seen any one of them that have actually confirmed compliance with parts A through M of the Irish building regulations. And that's what the legal requirement is in this state. So if a designer was to take a BBA cert, and it needs to be, it could be a starting point for helping to determine partial compliance, but the devil is in the detail, people. Second question that we often get, products that are UK CA marked. I have a product that doesn't have a CE mark, but I have this UK CA mark. So harmonized construction products which are being placed on the single market have to be CE marked. The presence of other marks, such as UK CA mark, doesn't demonstrate compliance. We understand there's no problem with them being on the product, but it doesn't comply with the construction product regulations. And the idea of the ETAs and the EADs, as I mentioned earlier, these are assessment methods for declaring what a product does, but they will not automatically confer compliance with the Irish building regulations. So again, it might be a useful starting point for a competent person, a designer, to determine that it's in compliance. But if building control do ask you to demonstrate explicitly how do you comply with the parts of the building regulation, this is what the requirement is. Finally, I suppose just a quick diagram to show that design, product, and workmanship, they're all cogs in the system. If any one of the cogs fails, the system will suffer. In order to get the system right, I suppose we have a lot of kind of secondary players around, but I suppose it is critical that everyone plays their role. That's the end of my presentation. Thanks for listening. I suppose I do want to thank you all for the jobs that you do, but across from building control, designers, manufacturers, contractors. I suppose you play an important role in housing and in getting people into safe homes, and it's an important job. And we hope that events like today are useful for all the stakeholders in advancing the knowledge, I suppose, trying to prevent some of the mistakes of the past. Thank you.